Melissa Keller, Director of Events and Project Management for Vineyard Worship. We release new music on the first Friday of every month. Our single for February, You Don't Have to Lose Heart, is a timely song of encouragement and a beautiful reminder that God is at work in a story much greater than we can see. Featuring Emmy-nominated vocalist Dana J., You Don't Have to Lose Heart provides a strength and steadiness for the most anxious of souls.
Hey now, you don't have to lose heart. Hey now, we're only at the start of what he's doing here. Hey now, you don't have to lose heart. Hey now, we're only at the start of what he's doing here. He's here. So let us put our trust in the one who carries us. We can let go of every disappointment. Let us cling to love, to the hope ahead of us, so we can hold on to every single promise. Don't have to lose heart. Don't have to lose heart. Don't have to lose heart.
Find You Don't Have to Lose Heart and all of our singles wherever you listen to music.
The Ferment.
After 18 years in one church, financially, my pastor sat with me and just said, "Hey, we can't keep you. We're so sorry." I just finished my master's degree in worship studies, and the worship team was as large and as fruitful as ever. We just finished a big record, and it was heartbreaking, right? And I had a choice there of how I was going to react, how I was going to respond. I can see it from a mile away now in future leaders of how they react and respond to injustice against them with grace and humility. I think when I did my first social post after that, I just kind of laid it out there. I identified the pain that we were feeling and just said, man, I am for the church. I'm for the leaders, even the ones that said goodbye. Just trying to champion the church, knowing that Christ is my ultimate boss and I need to hang on. So yeah, the reaction, responding, reacting to those losses is so huge. And so, sometimes I rehearse it, because there is change. There is so much change. God, what are you saying? What are you doing? What if? How would I react? How would I respond? You're my ultimate provider. And the Lord did provide. Like, so many killer things happened in that space of need and desire. It was so good. The Lord was so good.
You're listening to the Ferment Podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's guest is Michael Bryan, the director of the Vineyard School of Worship.
Michael Bryan, welcome to the podcast again.
Adam, it's good to be back.
Dude, it's been too long. It's like a year.
A year?
What in the world? And a crazy year at that.
What are you talking about?
I don't know, man. It was crazy for me. I don't know about you. Hey, why don't we do this? It has been a year. Why don't you just give everybody maybe a personal update and then maybe a bit of a clue as to what's going on with VSO?
Sure. Yeah. As some of you might know, if you heard my podcast from a year ago, I'm overseeing the Vineyard School of Worship. So I'm helping Vineyard Worship kind of in that with the education and we're doing conferencing and all kinds of great things. On top of that, I oversee, or I travel and I train worship leaders. I consult with churches and pastors. And so a lot of that work since COVID just shut down. And Susan and I were on the road. We were at the Mercy Vineyard in Raleigh, that kind of weekend where everybody wasn't sure what was going on, and they decided to go ahead and do the conference. So I've got a memory of being at the soundboard, being surrounded by like 12 people in a soundboard, and we were all thinking in the back of our head, like, what's going on? Like,
should we be here?
So we left that conference, and sure enough, just like everything else, the calendar cleared for itinerant travel people. The calendar cleared, and lots of silver linings, of extra rest and the Lord providing miraculously in so many sweet ways this past several months. And God's been good, obviously taking a lot of training online, doing lots of Zoom training and one-on-one coaching, which we'll probably talk about some things we're learning in that. Most of you learning how to navigate to online church, but I've been doing that with several churches. So there was one Sunday where I was leading worship for 2 churches simultaneously, or 3 churches. And me and my family sat down with our grape juice and our matzah cracker like we do every Sunday, and we watched ourselves lead worship in many different churches.
Amazing.
Which is
amazing.
Like, who knew that this would be a possibility?
Yes, the year we've had to reinvent everything. And that's the consistent thing. In a very inconsistent year, the one through line is everybody's had to reinvent everything they do. And that's true for Vineyard people, for Lutherans, for anybody who's pastor, for the Catholics. We've all had to figure something out new. Yeah,
and we've trimmed it down. We've done less songs. We've tried to learn how to look at the right lens on the camera and try to adjust our belt.
Everybody bought a ring light. We didn't even know what a ring light was until March.
Bought a ring light and tried to lose weight because you look back at the camera and you're like, my gosh, that's a large human leading. So just a lot of thinking about ourselves. And I'm constantly trying to get worship leaders to listen to their own recordings or to watch themselves.
Yeah.
So this has been a heck of a year to say, my goodness, a lot of worship leaders have refined themselves, but we've also found ourselves in some really shameful places, just like I was joking. But watching yourself lead people into the presence of God and not knowing. And then this whole thing of some of you guys probably did this where, a random Wednesday night, your pastor wanted you to lead worship or weekly worship, and you're looking at the little eyeball in the corner and it's like 0. Oh, 1. Oh, my uncle just popped on.
Yeah. Yeah. But you got to show up and do your best.
And then you just, and then 10 people show or whatever. But it's just like, what a year. Yeah. What a time to be alive in the church and to continue to try to serve her and the people. And
well, as you were talking there for a second, I was just quickly reminded of that meme. I think somebody maybe even posted it on our worship leaders page, but it's the meme where it's like the guy at the top and it says, how I sound in front of house. And then the guy underneath is like, how I sound on the stream.
Yeah.
And it's just devastating.
Oh,
it's like, oh my God, I thought I was ruling, but really I'm terrible.
Yeah, the kind of that third, I don't know what they call it, third ear, just being in the room, the forgiveness of a room to tuning and intonation and just vibe. You recognize how larger church movements, how much they really do spend to get it to look and sound great. Obviously, you got players and paid people, but my goodness, we've learned so much about what is really happening.
Yeah.
And some of it's not fair. It's not fair when you get the tape of the soundboard and you don't have the ambience of the room.
It's just dead, dry, direct line in.
So some of it's not fair. It's actually not honest to what's happening. But when people are watching at home, that is literally what they're seeing. And it's like, oh my goodness, there's a lot of conversations we've had in the past year about this.
Well, you know what? I've got a few things here that you and I wanted to talk about, but I guess one thing I'd like to ask even before we get into the other things, like you were saying, you've traveled, you're normally an itinerant person, as well as working for Vineyard Worship and as well as serving your own Vineyard Church there in Marietta. But I also know it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago, you had this Sunday where you were like at the Vineyard.
Yep.
And then you went to the Lutherans or the Episcopalian. I don't know. You did like 4 churches in one day.
Yeah. So my home church,
talk to me about
Vineyard
that.
Community Church, Marietta, Georgia, we had to move to 4 p.m., which is a really cool time to do church. I've dreamed about it for years, right? Sleeping in and kind of, it's a little more punk rock. And you finish up and you go to dinner. You know, it's just a really nice rhythm. So we moved to 4 p.m. in COVID times because just the way the rent worked out at our church. So that left my morning open and my evening open to help churches nearby. So I found myself in the situation where I guess I've led worship multiple times in a day, but I've never gone to 3 different churches within my city. So in the morning, I led worship at an Anglican church that is now meeting in a gym so they can get distance.
Okay.
And it's kind of it's maybe the highest form of Anglicanism that I've ever led in. So
robes?
They did robes. It was so weird because they had all the, I helped unload the van. And I'm carrying the cross into, I've got
like the communion cross, like on the table?
Yeah, the communion cross. I'm carrying that in one hand and the Bose speaker in the other hand. It was just like, this is so crazy. And so I led for that morning, and I did this psalm singing thing where it's this ancient practice where you sing a chorus to part of the psalm, and then the reader reads other parts of the song, and then you do the refrain, and it's back and forth. And that was really sweet. I'm so glad I got to lead that. But it was only like 2 songs for the whole hour service. And then this beautiful, beautiful thing. They didn't sing. Like, the congregation was encouraged not to sing just because of COVID. So at the very end, I followed the acolyte with the cross, with my guitar. I unplugged it, and we went outside, and we sang a final song. So
Everyone outside.
Everybody sang together, and something blew me away that I have yet. It caught me off guard. The priest at the very end, he read this Kenyan blessing.
Okay.
And I'm going to read it to you. I just found it here. Right at the end of the church. So the acolyte's holding the cross. We just finished singing Come Thou Long Expected Jesus. And the priest says, all of our problems. And the people say, we send to the cross of Christ. And they kind of did the arm thing to where they, all of our sins, we send to the cross of Christ. All of the devil's works, we send to the cross of Christ. And all of our hopes, we set on the risen Christ. And that, in this Anglican, what some might feel like is a stuffy, stringent service, my goodness.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling that. I'm not even there. I'm just hearing the story. I feel emotional. That's beautiful.
So sweet. So here I am in this high school gym. Outside, it's cold in December, and the Lord is doing something powerfully in my heart as their worship leader. So that's the morning. Then I get in my truck, and I drive straight to rehearsal at the Vineyard, and we set up a rug in the middle of a Christian school cafetorium. Cafetorium?
Cafetorium,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Like a gymatorium.
Yeah. With the fluorescent lights that like burn your flesh.
Do they buzz?
They do, but we turn them off.
Okay.
So we have one of those hipster lamps with the light bulb, and that's the only light for the whole room. So it's pretty punk rock.
Yeah, it's very Adventy.
It's very Adventy.
Yeah.
So we lead the service there, and that's like drums and bass and kind of your typical modern worship experience. And then that evening, I went to I didn't lead worship in the evening, but I went to like a Methodist evangelical church with this youth group that was spread out in the sanctuary, and they were singing, songs about the Father, and they gave a salvation message. So I just saw like 3 streams of the church in this beautiful way within one day as a worship
in your own
leader.
city.
In my own city. And it was very different from place to place, but the Lord was good. And, in the afternoon, that particular service, we have a lot of people of color in our service, and 2 of the older folks in our church, they lead the prayer, and it's very free form and like charismatic, and coming from the priestly prayer that was very kind of mapped out, both powerful in their own ways, right? So just a really cool picture of the church.
I love that. Well, that kind of leads me into the first thing I wanted to talk about. I mean, this is really an extension of that conversation. One of the things I know that you've done is you've been itinerant for more than a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've been traveling, well, you and Susan,
Yeah.
your wife. You've been traveling for several years, and you've gone to tons of Vineyard churches.
Yeah.
And you've gone to a lot of churches who are not in the Vineyard, just like kind of that Sunday is a microcosm of your life for the last 5 years.
Absolutely.
I'd just be interested to have you riff with us for a little bit about things you've just seen, noticed, patterns, things you've learned, learned maybe is a good word or not a good word, but just some observations that might be encouraging or just might be interesting to people who don't get to go travel. I mean, that's one of the things about being a pastor or being a worship leader, especially if you're at a small to medium Vineyard church. You're there all the time. So there's this whole church world that's happening outside of our little purview, and we just don't really know much of it. And sometimes it's good to hear a story from
I think I've said some of this stuff maybe before, but the idea that worship leaders are rock stars and they want a lot of power and prestige, and this this idea when I was growing up in the Vineyard, this notion that Satan was a worship leader.
Yes, I totally forgot about that. That's right. You can't trust worship leaders. That's the underlying message. I had no idea you were going to say that. That is funny.
Satan was in charge of all the angels. There's some weird theology about how they get there, but that's kind of this idea that this idea that we're basically embedded in the vibe is that we're not to be trusted.
We're usurpers.
And some of that is still very much alive, because before I show up, I try to get a lay of the land and talk to the worship leader and the pastors and see where things are and how we can make things better and help. There's still a lot of that trust versus suspicion dynamic between creative leaders and theological leaders, or biblical teachers and songwriters, right? So just kind of working out that tension is still very much there. And in healthy churches, often the ones that are inviting me in because they want to get healthier, it's good. There's lots of conversations and even jokes about it. They understand that there's different driving personalities or ways they feel like the gospel can best be presented and the story of God displayed. So there's that tension there. Most singers are not rock stars. Most of them don't have the same leanings as somebody with a high gifting, so much so that they're, on the top 10 of some chart somewhere. But most of us are just trying to get along, and get with it. We're basic people. So we're not rock stars. There's actually a lot of timid singers and people that are fearful. There's a sense of shame that kind of accompanies them. A voice of shame, as my wife would say, Susan, she always talks about like the voice of shame, like it's the enemy, it's the accuser. You're not good enough. You shouldn't be up here. Yeah. I know who you really are. So a lot of people are wrestling with those feelings of inadequacy. A lot of the church just needs help to step forward.
So this is something you're seeing in a lot of your places you go to. This
Absolutely.
is something you experience with worship leaders at all these places.
I'm telling people to step forward and to be louder more than I am to say, chill out. It's too much.
And then, but what I'm hearing, what you're saying in there is not just step forward and be louder, but even some of the timidity or the reservation, it's something deeper in the heart. It's some insecurity, some negative voice, something that's just not letting that person be confident in who they are or their calling or their place.
Yeah, there's been governors placed on the creative gift most of our lives in the church, in different places and with different people. Most people have stories. So when you go to that deep place and you say, hey, what's at the root of that thing you just said? Oftentimes it'll go back to what a parent had said at a young age, or a previous pastor, or an old youth group leader, just a random comment like, "Oh, you're always so loud when you sing that song," or "You always choose the cheesy songs," or something, like just a comment like that can carry and go with somebody for a long, long time. So the work that needs to be done in all of our lives, and I'm continually doing this myself, is saying, what are those things that are keeping me from being fully present and non-anxious as a leader? How can I lead the people without carrying all this extra baggage onto the stage and trying to meet an unmet need on the worship stage, because that's not the place to meet it. So that is certainly a theme, that relational theme. And another thing I'm learning is the obscure leaders, the ones with not a lot of clout, are oftentimes the ones that are more pastoral and more like the ones with the communication giftings and the type A, go get them. Like I'm finding a lot of value in the people that aren't making a lot of noise on the teams. So like a lot of times there's the worship leader, but then there's a secondary minister in the band. There's a secondary relational captain in the band that they're important roles. They might not rock the bass. They might be the simplest bass player in the world, but they know how to connect with the new drummer kid.
Yeah.
In the green room, they're sweet. In pandemic, they're really gracious and they're able to help and supply energy and joy. So just different kind of giftings other than the musical gifting that are so important.
Okay, so when you're traveling and you're noticing, oh, this person on the team, maybe they're less seen in some ways, but you're an outside observer, so sometimes things are clear to you that are not clear to the guys in the system. And you're saying, oh, this person is kind of the pastoral lifter.
Yeah.
Is that something you're calling out?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Are you trying to make everybody aware of that? Are you trying to highlight that?
Well, I think I'll call it out in a group in a way that's not going to give them a new job or something, but certainly with the post gathering meeting, if I'm doing a follow up with the pastor, or I'll be like, hey, you recognize that guy's actually doing a lot of the leadership, even though they're not your A singer, they are doing a lot of work, and the value they bring, like in lifting the band. I'm thinking of one guy in particular from a church I served for a while. He's 55 years old, works like business. He's not the coolest person. He doesn't dress cool. There's nothing modern worship about this guy, but he brings joy and encouragement to the team. It's like I need him on the team sometime. It's almost like in Planning Center, you need an encourager. You need a pastor. You need a killer musician, right? You need kind of other gifts that aren't necessarily pre-assigned in our modern church world.
Well, and I'll tell you just what I'm hearing and what you're saying there. I'm hearing you invite worship leaders into seeing your team different, rather than just saying, oh, that person is a good bass player, that person is my best keyboard player, and going, well, then the best Sunday must be the Sunday that all the best musicians play.
Yeah.
Maybe I get one great guitar player, and it's the best Sunday is when I've got my pastor leader, my welcomer, my hospitality person.
And really who I'm teaching this to more than the worship leaders or the very people that maybe have that secret gift or that uncommon gift, I'm teaching the pastors and the elder team.
Talk to me about that. Why?
Well,
what
for
does that mean?
the pastor is saying, okay, when I looked up there, this wasn't very compelling. This person wasn't very compelling, right? Don't we have a better singer than that?
Yeah.
Don't we have a better drummer than that guy? Don't we have a better sound person than that guy? Well, sure, we've got better, right? We need some weeks off, which is a part of it. But let me share with you what's going on that's a little deeper than the optics of the 30-minute song set. I'm discipling that new kid. He's going to be a Christian. He's probably going to be baptized and be a Christian within the year, and he's part of our team, right? So there's another dynamic that's going on. I intentionally want to have, in certain churches, I want to have all ages on the stage. So I'm going to value that and invite people. So it's more than just the musical optics. It's certainly in churches of 100 or 200, when things get up into the thousands, there's other considerations, certainly. But in our smaller churches, making room for these other giftings, it's important. It's important that at the end of serving your church for 3 or 4 years, if somebody were to be a part of your church, they would look back and say that was an edifying, life-giving experience versus they wore me out. Yeah. And their production quality was great, but it cost me a lot. I'm never going to church again.
Yeah, I'm just, I just feel I feel so judged. I feel so under the microscope or whatever. Well, and it brings up another topic since we're just on this idea of pastors and what pastors see. Newsflash, I am a pastor. So, we sit on the front row, don't we?
Sure.
We worship, I do worship, but at the same time, I can own this. I think most pastors are, we're observing the service also with an eye to, gosh, did we do any good? Did we?
Yeah.
A lot of us want things to be better.
Yep.
And so sometimes we don't see this other thing.
Yeah.
Even though those are things that are supposed to be like key parts of like the fruits of the Spirit and, key parts of the kingdom.
Yeah, I see the worship stage. I understand everybody doesn't see it like this, but I see it as the center of the world. So this is a place for me in my gifting, in my calling to disciple and see people come to faith, to see the church made strong, to see musicians and creative people challenged and grow. There's so much that can happen there. It can happen in the booth. Now it can happen with online church and all the technical needs we have. These are touch points that I have as a worship pastor, not just rocking your face out on Sunday morning and singing well and leading the people, good morning, welcome, blah, blah, blah. But all this stuff, that's the tip of the iceberg. All these other discipleship places that can happen because the worship team oftentimes, other than the kids' church, has the most amount of volunteers. It's the most touch points. Certainly the most moving parts in a morning. So those are lots of places to connect with people and to love on folks. So
yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Well, I before we move on, anything else from traveling? I mean, those are two huge things. Anything else you've noticed or that seems important to us as we're just kind of going, man, maybe there's something else that I could learn here?
Yeah, I do see a softening of this idea that we need to play all the hits. I think we're reaching to a point of saturation with songs, is that they're cycling in the top CCLI so fast now that most people can't keep up. 3 or 4 years ago, we could keep up. But now it's so fast that we actually can't even keep up as hard as we try. So we're actually settling into some healthier patterns, I've noticed, where songs are being sung several weeks in a row. There's a smaller diet of songs versus this huge saturation of how many songs we can sing. So,
well, and I also know that more and more worship leaders that I talk to actually have song universes, like spelled out. For the next quarter, we're going to do these 25 songs.
Yeah. They're saying no to hits, or songs that, they're playing on the radio. They're just like, well, we just don't have enough space for all that. So that's been some signs of health. I've seen a lot of leanings into scripture reading during worship, which has been really rich, whether it's pulling from the lectionary or just reading a psalm, non-musical elements, right? So in pandemic, our whole idea of the 6-song set, and certainly chilling out on a song for a long time, it just doesn't work when I'm watching you, in your living room with cheap lighting or whatever. It's just not going to fly anymore. So we're doing less music, but also these other elements of like pre-written prayers or litanies or spiritual direction moments, being creative with the liturgy where we're telling the story of God. We're inviting people to experience Him, but it's just taking different shape. And I think that's good for us. That's really good for us to explore that. So I'm seeing a lot of that. What else am I seeing online? My goodness, people are buying better gear and they're learning the craft. I mean, people have gone from 0 to 5, and then they've reevaluated and gone from 5 to 8. Like, it's just really beautiful to see people's commitment to getting it as well as they can for their context.
Well, I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier. We've never watched ourselves before. So now we do, and we go, wow, we need to invest.
Yeah.
You know, our lighting is important, or the camera is important, or just I need to think about how the broadcast mix goes out. Because we just didn't think of that.
Yeah, and if you're listening right now, this will probably be in the new year, but buy your technical people a gift card.
Anything.
Like, send a thank you note, like our appreciation for our technical people and our network. You know, they sat online and they got better cable for us. You know, just all those hours. My goodness, we need to celebrate these people and really say thank you.
I know at my church, no one. I think this is true. No one worked harder than the tech crew this year, and that's, you know, shout out to Bobby, but there's 5 other people underneath him at my church, and they redid everything.
Yeah.
You know, and it's really beautiful. They got us through, and we didn't
so much work,
and we didn't close, and we didn't. There's still a church, you know. So high five to the tech cream. Hey, I want to maybe shift gears here for a second, and it's just riffing off something you mentioned a moment ago. You said that people were singing fewer songs, that the song churn, the song saturation that exists in the world has gotten to such a level we can't keep up. Yeah. So that forces us to make choices. Yeah. Hopefully they're choices based upon our values or things that we want to inject in our church. Yep. The Caleb Maskell thing of sing the story of God. Yeah. You know, hopefully we're doing that. If you're saying no, like if you're putting some parameters on this in order to be able to, well, I guess what I'm saying is if you're saying yes to some songs, then there's a sense in which you're also saying no to some songs. Yeah. And probably people are coming and saying, Mike, I want to do this song. Sure. You know, this song, it's a hit and we haven't done it. Yeah. How do you manage that? How do you manage it if, you know, all of a sudden you look up Waymaker's huge, but it's not in your song universe right now? Yeah. Now what?
Well, let me just say, it's okay if you never sing that song that blew up in the global church, right? It's okay if you never sing it. If it never made it to your list, that's okay, because there's too many. There's just too many to get to. And part of being a good dietitian for Tom Brady is saying, no, we're good on the cake. No, we're good on this. We've got a plan, and Tom needs this kind of food. But I baked him this. I meant it, and it was sincere, and I want him to have. Yeah. Well, I love you, and that's amazing. I'm not diminishing your gift that you're offering, but it's just not for him, for this place. So we are preparing that meal. You don't have to take delight in saying no, but you know, it does take the pressure off. Yeah. And you know, I've never led the blessing. I don't know the chords. I don't know how to use that song in a set. I've never used it. I like the song. It's a beautiful song. I love that it was this global theme around the world. So beautiful. I kind of enjoyed it more, maybe because I didn't. No, and actually that happens to me sometimes. Like when the Lord touches me in a song, just one-on-one at home, I actually prefer not to bring it to the big room, because it's like, oh, this is so sweet. I kind of want to keep this for myself. I know that's probably not great all the time, but learning to say no. And then when people bring requests, what they're saying is, you know, the pastor brings requests, the elders, the congregation, the band. My goodness, the band brings requests. I always say thank you. I always say, wow, thank you. My goodness, like you care. Yeah. Like you're wanting to throw a log on the fire and help, and that's really helpful. And then I always ask this question: what about that song do you think would be edifying for our particular church? Right? There's usually a pause of like, well, I just like the way it sounded in my new Audi. You know, the speakers are slamming and I can hear, you know, whatever. I can hear the production and it sounds great, is a lot of what is happening with people. And they're being touched by the Lord and they want to share that with the whole congregation. That's a beautiful thing. But most of the time my answer is, thank you for sharing. I'll consider that. I'm going to listen to it. Check back with me, right?
Yeah.
And normally I won't hear back from him, but I'm honoring the request and I'm saying that's so beautiful that you care, and I'm going to listen because I'd love to hear why it touched you, and then really ask them, is this edifying to the church? Why would it be? And that makes them think about the lyric, which is of utmost important, is what does the lyric say? And where would that fit within the diet of what we're already saying?
Yeah. I mean, what I like about the approach you just shared is it's a little bit of that Steve Cuss stuff that we have been learning about on our team. But then just, some of the people in the Vineyard, for those of you who don't know, Steve has this book called Managing Leadership Anxiety. A few moments ago, you talked about being a non-anxious presence.
Yeah.
Part of being a non-anxious presence is in anxious moments, and sometimes when someone maybe brings a song or is advocating for something, it can be anxiety-inducing because we know there may be a no coming up. But one of the cool tools there is to engage, I think Steve calls it just curiosity. Rather than just saying no, well, then let's engage in some curiosity and go, well, what is it about? That's what I'm hearing you say. What is it about this song that resonates? Why does this percolate to the surface for you?
Yeah.
And that can be a totally different conversation.
Yeah, great leaders ask questions, certainly in conflict. What is it about that really hurt? Or what is it about right now that's adding so much tension? Like allowing people to answer the questions, this humble inquiry of tell me more. I want to understand. What is it about that? Why are you saying that? Oh, well, actually, I'm just tired of you doing all those Vineyard songs, and I want more of this kind of thing, or I'm tired of you doing that thing with where she sings. Usually there's sometimes there might be another agenda or thing they're trying to get across the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
And to deal, certainly when band brings requests, there's it has a killer guitar solo. You love the drum beat thing. Of course you want to do that song.
I want to play it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get that. Yeah. I know this was a few weeks ago. My son, River, was playing in the band, and I got up early. It's a Sunday morning, and he's getting ready too. And I'm like, oh, you playing today? He's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then, he, offhand, he says to me, which isn't illegal. It's a fine thing to say. Yeah. But he says, man, all the songs are good this morning.
Sure.
Which what he means is they're not boring. They're he gets to do something on the drum kit that makes him stoked, and so he was pretty happy about that.
That's a good sign, and we should strive for that. That would be a good marker that a 19-year-old would say, I like today's songs, right? In a church, in a modern, what kind of songs are we singing? Yeah. Are there songs that really, you're not just dialing in, you're not just mimicking what the culture and the labels and kind of the church at large is kind of saying, well, this is acceptable. Yeah. You're thinking, oh, what's something I can bring to the table that's going to be really rich and good. And when you're writing songs, my goodness, if your church is creating its own songs, that's such a life-giving thing. And people lean in, they get so excited about crafting that song,
Yeah, well, I just love the pastoral wisdom here of requests are going to come.
Yeah.
And engage some curiosity. Actually listen to the song that someone sent you. And then hopefully that leads to more conversations on the backside even, Yeah. I just hear the pastoral nature of what you're saying.
Yep.
Rather than just the yes-no man.
And not to be reactionary. Mm-hmm. Oh, I hate that. I can't stand. Unforeseen kiss, or just your reaction just does not need to be inflamed. It could be like, okay, that's interesting. And sometimes those requests, certainly from your leadership, it's going to be a different response or way. You don't want to be a jukebox where they just put a request in and you do it. And you can and should do that. I mean, sometimes I've done that many times over the years where I've just sung songs that I have zero. They're not compelling to me, but the pastor wanted me to do it. I'll do that often. But if that's happening every week, and it's not compelling to you, or you feel like you're just a puppet, then there needs to be conversations.
Yeah, those are different situations. I mean, it's like, am I being micromanaged? What? Yeah. Yeah, what's happening here?
Yeah, and a lot of people are.
Yeah.
As I've traveled the church, some pastors are very, very into every song choice, and it can be stifling. Sometimes it's great. I've been to a couple churches where the pastor picked the set. I'm like, that's pretty good. Like, thanks.
Yeah.
But usually it can be really stifling, because that's one of the only creative places for worship leaders to kind of spread their wings, is to choose the songs and the keys. So if you take that away from them, that makes it really difficult.
Let's shift gears here too. One of the things that's also happened this year is things have just moved more. We've had to go online. Okay, now we're not online, we're meeting in person, but it's half the people, and you have to wear a mask, or maybe you don't wear a mask, and then, okay, now the governor says you can't be on anymore. So there's just been all this uncertainty in the church, and you and I were chatting a little bit before about how there's just been more moving parts in terms of staff on churches. And like, you needed a new tech guy, or you needed a new worship leader. Maybe somebody's no longer in the mix of what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And so there's been staff changes. I know, gosh, Mike, I think this year, pretty consistently, I've had 5 or 6 pastors at a time all year long calling me wanting a new worship leader, or things have just been moving. I don't think I've ever seen positions at churches, especially around worship, but then even beyond that, kids and everything is just moving. Talk to me about that. Like, talk to me about like hiring people, or letting someone go, or maybe what was needed in the season before. Maybe there's a worship leader who's listening right now. Maybe you were bullseye of what we needed before,
Sure, yeah.
But now all of a sudden you find yourself in a church, or maybe your things have just changed and you're not what was needed anymore.
Yeah.
Or talk to me about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversations, even before COVID, and certainly since. Every week, I normally have 2 to 5 or 10 conversations with pastors, worship leaders, people looking for worship jobs, and a lot of pastors trying to find somebody new. Some of them are they're desperate for anybody, and some of them have somebody that they're not 100% happy with, they'd like to replace, which can be really sensitive. So I think in general, we need to have clear expectations of what we want, what the role is. If that can't be written on a PDF somewhere of like, hey, what's expected of you as a worship pastor, or worship leader, what's the title? A worship pastor is different than a worship leader, is different than a worship director. These titles carry different weight to them, responsibility. They're all valid roles, right? I know a lot of times we talk about you want to be a pastor and not just a leader, but it's okay. There's different roles in different places.
Yeah,
different sizes
even one of the roles that I've seen way more in the last 5 years is music director.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean that's pretty common in certain styles of big church. I know it's especially common in certain like black gospel churches.
Yeah.
But that's beginning to morph into other
Sure.
kinds of churches too.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly with the, increased use of tracks and things like that, musical director can hold a lot of things together. And then maybe you have a pastoral person that isn't as gifted musically, but they can help the people process. So one idea is that the 80s, 90s, 2000s worship leader, a 23-year-old guy, or whatever, a 35-year-old dude is not the only kind of person that can oversee worship or fill in the need to communicate and invite people to sing the story of God and to experience him. So all sorts of different people can happen, men, women, younger, older, even older generation people that you might think, oh, I don't want to build my whole worship ministry on a 50-year-old person. Well, if they're a developer, they're going to develop tons of young people, right? And I see this all the time where these older men and women are developing young worship leaders, and the church is exciting and very full of all kinds of volunteer people that are following an older person. So don't just assume you need one kind of person. Or gender. Reach out, think about who can fill out different roles in the church. So one-page job description, what is a worship leader in this church in this season? What are they in charge of? Don't make assumptions that, well, of course they're in charge of sound and media. Well, you need to spell that out and say that that's part of the role. But maybe God sends you somebody that's great at everything, but they're not great at that part of it, right? So you can make the role change. It can be flexible depending on who God brings you.
Yeah.
And if you're in a worship leader spot and you're unhappy, let's say something's brewing in you and you sense there's a change coming, I'm trying to help people leave better than they're leaving. I think a lot of times the way we do transitions in these second and third chair positions in churches is just really horrific, and I think it does injustice.
Well, talk to me about that. I mean, that can be a difficult subject, but it's clearly pertinent.
Yeah, I think when it's not character issues, right? So if there's a character issue, what would they be, Adam? Like, what would count as that?
Well, I mean, it could be any number of things. Maybe, I mean, in the church, maybe this is just fresh on my mind, but
Sure.
Adultery always is kind of top of the list.
Yeah.
It's kind of a
Sure.
killer.
Yep.
And there's a sense in which, as bad as that is, it makes the call easy.
Sure.
Yep. And even the person who is in adultery knows that's disqualifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Adultery, money issues.
Sure.
There being like a list of things that have been done, gossip things, or just things that need to be addressed that have been addressed time and time again, whatever. I mean, there's like the obvious ones that a change needs to happen. But oftentimes what happens is you're in a place and you're not happy, or like the pastor's driving you bonkers and you just quit. You say, hey, I'm done. Next weekend's my last weekend, or whatever. I think we need to learn how to exit well. The idea that your last day is your best day, and that the changes that we make in this place really impact the church in a big way. And it's more than just us and our families that are being impacted, but we're really impacting everybody. And we need to think about leaving lots of notice, and even the culture of the way people say yes and no to things in our worship ministries. We're so used to planning center, like sending out the requests and people are like, no, yes, no,
Text.
yes.
Yeah. Just
Versus like actually committing to something, via a calendar and not just deciding, oh, it's Monday, this Sunday, I'm not feeling it. We want to give weeks and months notice and say, hey, we're going to be transitioning out over a long time, and really honor the church, honor your leaders by giving them lots of time, even when they've hurt you, even when they're hurting you.
Okay.
That our allegiance is to Christ. We are serving him primary, but we just don't want to be jerks and peace out, without
Okay, so let me
process.
change the scenario with you just for a second. Because what you were explaining, and yes to all of that, right? Make your last day your best day. Yes, all of that. But what you were explaining is that situation where maybe you've been a worship leader there for a while and you just feel like, oh, it's time for me to go. But what you're describing is that's my decision.
Yeah.
Talk to me about leaving when it wasn't your decision. Talk to me about leaving when it was the elder board's decision,
Sure.
or, the pastor's decision, or the church just hit financial hard times, and maybe that the spot that they choose to trim the fat on is the worship position, and you're like, man, I didn't really want to leave.
Yeah.
But talk to me dealing with that emotionally.
That happened to me literally after 18 years in one church. Financially, my pastor sat with me and just said, hey, we can't keep you. We're so sorry. I just finished my master's degree in worship studies, and the worship team was as large and as fruitful as ever. We just finished a big record, and it was heartbreaking, right?
Yeah.
And I had a choice there of how I was going to react, how I was going to respond. I felt a deep grief immediately. I mean, for myself and for my family, like, wow, I just lost my job and my vocation all at once. But I felt this need to respond well and graciously. Like, I felt this grace of like, all right, Mike, you need to give as much as you can give in this transition. Give more than you're required. And so I think you are going to take a hit. Personally, if you do it well, you should feel a little, not walked on, but you should feel like, I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, it's a strange situation when someone's like, okay, we're going to let you go. But what I hear you saying is you serve Christ first, and so you just keep giving until that end date comes, right?
Yeah, and my love for the church is so much that I want her to thrive through the transition.
Yeah.
So yes, I could take a couple cheap shots, and it's going to be through gossip, right? So as I go tell people,
or social media. I'm even thinking of.
Man. Yeah.
I'm even thinking of the temptation. I'll put it this way, right?
Yeah.
Like if you were to get let go and you go, well, I served here 18 years.
Yeah.
I know stuff about this church no one knows, right? And I'm going to burn it to the ground on Facebook.
Oh, yeah. The temptation is there, as Rich Mullins says, the Lord says, vengeance is mine, and I just want to be about the Lord's business, right? Like,
But bang.
So, like, you definitely feel that when you have all these reasons justified, like you can burn it to the ground. You can say things that are going to make you sound amazing, maybe as amazing as you are, but it's going to diminish the church. It's going to hurt the church.
And then also just very practically, if I could just say it as someone who watches things, if I see somebody post something like that, I mean, maybe it's true, right? Or maybe it's not, but even after a few years of being a leader, I look at that and go, man, I don't really want to hire that person now. I just, it causes me to not trust, even if they were really wrong. I mean, it's like, this is maybe not the forum to work things out.
Yeah. I can see it from a mile away now
Yeah.
in future leaders of how they react and respond to injustice against them with grace and humility, and truth. I think when I did my first social post after that, I just kind of laid it out there. I identified the pain that we were feeling and just said, man, I am for the church. I am for the leaders, even the ones that said goodbye, just trying to champion the church, knowing that Christ is my ultimate boss and I need to hang on. So the reaction, reacting to those losses is so huge. And so, sometimes I rehearse it, because there is change. There is so much change. God, what are you saying? What are you doing? What if? How would I react? How would I respond?
Yeah.
You're my ultimate provider. And the Lord did provide. Like, so many killer things happened in that space of need and desire. It was so good. The Lord was so good,
Well, Mike, I have one more question, and I hope it's not too personal. Okay, so that happens to you. This is your story even, when it isn't your choice. And it is painful, and you don't do the Facebook burn it down thing.
Yeah.
Talk to me how you do process it. what did you do to like process the shock, the grief? I think grief would be a word I'd put in there.
Yeah.
And then I'm just assuming, you and I have not talked about this, but I'm assuming that it would even cause you to maybe reevaluate your vocation.
Sure.
Like, is this what I'm supposed to do now? Like, what am I going to do for my future?
Well, I think it's important for all of us as worship leaders, ministry people, to have a couple punching bags. So what do I mean by this? This is people outside of your local context that you can tell anything to, and they will not rat you out, right? So for me, I had 2 of those people, 3 of those people already in line in ministry. So when I got laid off, they called me, I called them and said, oh, it just went down. They wept with me. They said, yeah, you were wrong. They said all the right things. This is not right. Dude, what the heck are they doing? They did all that. And because I had that, I didn't have to go to the peanut gallery. I didn't have to go to everybody. I was able to just grieve and process it with my punching bags. One of those is a spiritual director. So just somebody I pay $75 a month to.
That's right.
To ask me good questions. So that was so important. And for my wife to have that as well, because your spouse is a part of it. And a lot of times in the boardroom, your spouse isn't in the boardroom, but it affects your spouse.
Well, I mean, without being too personal, I know a lot of times that anytime I've had trouble in ministry, I'll just put it that way, or drama, I haven't had that experience that you're describing, but anytime I've had drama, I know that it oftentimes hurts me, but sometimes Heather feels it more.
Absolutely.
Than even I do, or at least even that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Because we were in the boardroom with the suits, and it was being processed over 10 or 20 minutes or an hour. There's a lot of detail in there, a lot of nuance, and then we just come home and say, yeah, they let me go, or yeah, they want to do this for Christmas, or yeah, they want to do, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, and they end up despising things that we don't even despise anymore because we've already processed it, or we've forgiven the person, or we've, so to whatever extent you can bring spouses into those big decisions is really good. Pastors, do not take your worship leader to their favorite spot to tell them you're firing them. Do not take them and buy them a nice meal. And, there's just some nuanced stuff like that that's happened to me, but also happens to others. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like that is not appropriate. Like, do not connect, this place with this bad memory. It's just be a little smarter with, or like be a bite into your $100 steak and be like, oh, by the way, we're cutting your budget, or whatever. Like,
that's right.
So just,
it's interesting that we're having this conversation because I didn't know we were going to really talk about this, but it's so important. I mean, this is one of those areas that a lot of times in ministry, we study the Bible.
Sure.
We learn the songs. We get spiritual direction. We do all this stuff, right? But one of the areas that is so involved in church leadership is just human resources stuff, but we have like no training in it.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I fired someone, and this is not at church, so this was like a business I owned. I fired someone and they needed to be fired. They'd just become damaging to the company that I was running, and they needed to go. It was the right decision, but I had never done it before.
Yeah.
And Mike, I did a really, really bad job of firing the person.
Yeah.
And as soon as I did it, I knew that I'd done a bad job.
Yeah.
I didn't know why I'd done a bad job. It was even at that level. Like, it was like all gut. Like, I knew it was the right decision.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I knew I'd done it poorly.
Yeah.
And a few years later go by, and I need to make another staff change, and I do it, and it's like a lot better.
Yeah.
But it took a while, and when it comes to church and things, a lot of times us pastors, we don't know the human resources side of anything. We don't even know where to get help.
Yeah, and if that's the first place you're doing conflict is in major letting go or these big
nuclear option.
Yeah, it's like people should know they're being fired. Like, it should be obvious. Like, oh, he's calling me in. This is it. You should have said many things. Things should have been leaked to the point where it's not like a brick wall,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes both ways. Like if you feel like a transition's coming on, like you and your spouse want to buy an RV and take off and do the and do the COVID thing, that's awesome. But maybe just give folks a little heads up. Hey, Pastor, we've been feeling this stuff.
Something's up.
Will you speak into it? We've let you speak into other things. Will you maybe speak into this as well?
Yeah.
And processing that desire for change with many different people, not just your fans. So if you just process with your fans, hey, should I leave or should I move on from this? Yeah, man, you should move on from that. Whatever you want to do. Well, maybe talk to some older people, younger people, talk to a spiritual director, get some wisdom. I think Jared Boyd talked about the Clearness Committee, this ancient practice. I don't know how ancient it is, but just having people ask you questions about your transition or your desire to make a new decision, like not just making it with your wife in bed and saying, yeah, let's do this. And all right, like really seeking the Lord, seeking others, allowing others to speak into it be really important.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think that'll be helpful to people. Okay, last thing here. Left-hand turn here. But you and I were texting, I don't know, was it last week or the week before? I was just texting you, and I think I even texted Casey and Melissa, the Vineyard Worship crew.
Yeah.
Mike, I'm kind of stricken right now, a little bit, just because we've had so many high-profile Christian leaders fall.
Yeah.
And now I'm 42. This is not new.
Yeah.
I know that people screw up. I know that people make poor decisions.
Yeah.
But it feels like, oh man, here we are. And it almost feels worse right now for some reason. Yeah. Maybe it's just pandemic grief or something else sitting on top of it. I'm just very aware of how broken leaders can be.
Yeah.
And even how very broken pastors can be.
Yeah.
And at the same time, how gifted they can be. Like can stand on the Sunday morning and preach good news.
Yeah.
Cause people's hearts to be moved. Cause people to feel like they have the freedom to make decisions for Jesus, and at the same time, they're just broken. I don't know. I wish you would maybe just riff with me for a moment about just broken leaders and how do we keep doing our thing.
Well, every time I see a news story of a communicator that's fallen, I always recognize in myself the fragility of my own condition, and the hypocrisy of me being up on stage, rattling my mouth, singing songs that maybe I don't believe, or like just the rank hypocrisy of my own life. So I always tread carefully, even if my sins aren't on the naughty scale of some of the big boys or ladies, whoever's being exposed. I always try to tread carefully, knowing that I'm one of the Pharisees pointing down at the prostitute saying, casting stone, So I always take a pause, even though I think I'm pretty moral dude, I take pause. And another thing I think about, I just want to say this, is like, I think it's pretty cool that most of the worship leaders, like the high profile things, have not been with worship leaders. I mean, I know there have been some, but I'm kind of satisfied and happy that a lot of high profile worship leaders lead really good lives, and that there's a lot of them that have had decades and decades and decades of faithful service to the church.
It's interesting.
I'm really satisfied with that, and I'm kind of mystified by it a little bit.
No, it begs the question, right? Like a few questions. Number one, is that true?
Yeah.
We think it's true.
I think it's true.
I'll go with you.
Yeah. So, really what I'm saying is, like, what if Satan was a pastor and not a worship leader?
You're hilarious. But it does. It's an interesting thing. It's like, A, is it true? And then B, it begs the question of why might that be true?
Yeah. Well, in a worship leader sense, you're surrounded with band and people.
There's community. I mean, the first thing my brain went to is
Yeah.
more built-in community. And there's something about pastoring that can be oddly isolating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're in a room studying by yourself, locking the door. I mean, yeah, there's isolating parts of worship leadership, but you're with a community. You're which is part of what makes it more difficult in some ways, so many moving parts, right? But I don't know why that is, and like you said, I don't know if it's actually true, but I am thankful for so many of these men and women that have modeled faithful leadership through the midst of storms for years and years. So yeah, I think of my own fragility. I think of how disappointing it is, how many Bill Hybels books and things that I go to, and then to see some of his stuff, or even, Mark Driscoll, so many different leaders that I've read and I've enjoyed their work and they've formed and shaped me. I just think, well, okay, what do I do with all that? Does it still count? Lord, help me. I'm so disappointed.
Yeah.
Why, Lord? Because I'm looking for I was fatherless. So I'm looking for a father figure. I'm looking for somebody that's going to hang on to the Lord. I'm looking for these examples. And when so many of them fall, and when a lot of people in your own context, your very own pastor or your leaders that are not even celebrities, but maybe they're celebrities to you, when they fall, it's so gut-wrenching, man.
It is. And, I have some thoughts on all of that. And honestly, I'm not even going to share any of them because I don't even know that this is the context for that. And I wouldn't want it to come off like I was beating someone up or on a hobby horse or a high horse.
Well, pastor me something. Tell me something.
No. Oh, well, I can tell you this. I mean, what I can tell you is most pastors are not that, right?
Yes.
I guess I've been wounded more than usual just by the Carl Lentz news.
Wow.
And it's not even because I ever listened to him preach or because I was a Hillsong podcast guy or something, because that wasn't it. It's just that thing of, gosh, Carl was uniquely plugged into culture.
Yeah.
Bieber.
Yeah.
And not that we need a pastor who's that hip necessarily.
Sure.
But I think it's disappointing to me to go, oh, there was a pastor there, and dang it, man, we just we just didn't put our best foot forward as the church.
Yeah.
And that's not me saying I'm better than Carl Lentz, because, gosh, I'm as weak as anybody, and
Sure.
I know I've had moments that could have gone really poorly, and God was gracious. So I'm just telling you, this is my stuff. But the thing I do know, if I can spin this around another way, is most pastors are not that. In fact, most pastors are extremely faithful in obscurity. No one knows them, and they've just plowed the long row.
And
Praise
that's
the Lord.
story. That's the true story of the church, which makes me so angry.
Yeah.
That, there's never going to be a BuzzFeed article about the true story of the church.
Oh, no. I mean,
like this person stayed longer and swept up all the rice that fell from the food pantry and gave their last $100 and picked up this kid and mentored him. Like all those stories are not going to be told.
Yeah.
All the underpaid, understaffed people that just do miracles day in and day out.
Yeah, that's the story. I think, I think that's the real story. And that goes not just for pastors, but that goes for the church. I think you even framed it that way. The church is an easy target.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot in the church that is wrong. There's a lot in the church that hasn't been cool. And there's a lot of hypocrisy that pops through. But most of the church is just out there like serving the poor and, making a place for teenage guys and gals who didn't have anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I did a podcast 2 days ago. I did a podcast a couple days ago with Ryan Delmore, and he told the most beautiful story about how he came to Jesus.
Yeah.
And it was because the coolest surfer guy in the Central Coast had all the surf rats over to his house who were like 13 and 14, and he did worship and he did a Bible study. Man, ain't nobody giving that guy a hand clap.
Yeah.
But here we are. We've reaped the benefits. And so I think that's the story of the church. But yeah, man.
So disappointing.
It is. It's just disappointing. I hate when the church gets a black eye like that. It's like,
But here's what fires me up about leading worship this Sunday, right? Like, I'm going to lead worship this Sunday. Like, I want to tell the true story of who God is, and that the church has been the healing balm for centuries and centuries. Certainly there are terrible stories of what the church has done, but my goodness, the force of good on the earth that the church has been. I want to rally her and help her to sing the story of God and invite her to the communion table and say, rich, poor, prostitute, businessman, come and feast on Christ. He is here. He has given himself for everybody. Yeah. I want to tell that story. Like, after hearing Carl fail, after hearing Bill Hybels, after hearing whatever any of these people have done, there's a part of me that gets really depressed.
Yeah.
There's another part of me that's like, dang it, I'm going to hang on.
Yeah.
For my children, I'm going to hang on. I'm going to keep pressing in and singing. I'm going to sing. I'm going to invite others. I'm going to keep writing songs. I'm going to keep praying.
Amen.
And not give up,
Amen. I don't think I can say anything more better than that.
Lord, help us. Thank you.
Man, Mike, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man.
So much here. All right, everybody. Peace.
Hey everyone, Casey Coram here, producer of the podcast. Thanks for listening. As always, if you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. First of all, leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media. Instagram at Ferment Podcast and Twitter at FermentCast. All right, everyone, thanks for listening. See you next week. Peace.